After Dai departed, Min stood in the middle of his workshop, staring at the chest. His mind buzzed with conflicting thoughts. He replayed Dai's words, "Write down what you want, focus on the positive." It sounded like a simple enough exercise, but part of him was too jaded to believe in such easy remedies. For much of the day, Min tried to push the conversation to the back of his mind. He returned to sanding, carving, and polishing, letting the steady rhythm of manual labor calm his swirling anxieties. Occasionally, though, he found himself pausing, recalling the gentle assurance in Dai's voice. Despite his skepticism, he couldn't deny that something about that man's energy had been deeply calming, almost magnetic. Come evening, after he'd finished his tasks and locked up the workshop, Min headed home. The walk was peaceful but gave him time to reflect. Could it really be possible that what he thought and felt might directly influence the events of his life? He had always taken pride in being a realist, relying on tangible, visible results. But realistically, what had that approach gotten him so far? Continual stress, sleepless nights, and a pervasive sense of limitation. When he entered his home, he found Lan preparing dinner. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice tinged with the usual concern. "Fine," Min replied, offering a small smile. "I had a visitor, an older man who said some interesting things." Lan raised an eyebrow. "A customer?" "I'm not sure. He talked about the power of our thoughts." Min tried to phrase it carefully so as not to sound foolish. "He said if we focus on what we truly want, rather than what we fear, we'll invite better things into our lives." Lan paused, setting down her wooden spoon. "There might be some truth in that," she said gently. "My grandmother always told me to count blessings, not problems." Her simple statement comforted Min. After they put Tian to bed, he hesitantly shared more details about Dai's visit. Lan listened intently, occasionally nodding. She was a quiet soul, but she had a deep reservoir of faith that balanced Min's more pragmatic nature. "It can't hurt to try," Lan said. "We already know what worry does, it makes us miserable." She touched Min's hand. "Let's see if there's another way." Spurred by her gentle encouragement, Min picked up a small notebook that Lan used to jot down household needs. He turned to a fresh page and began to write, in clear letters. "I want to have a steady stream of customers so we can pay all our bills on time. I want to fix the roof and stop worrying about leaks. I want our son Tian to have the education he deserves. I want us to have a strong, loving home." He stared at the words, feeling a mixture of vulnerability and hope. Was he being naive, or was he tapping into something deeper? Lan read over his shoulder, nodding approvingly. "That's a good start," she said. "Now let's add a note of gratitude for what we already have." Min was surprised by how difficult it felt to switch gears. The negativity had become his default setting. But Lan was right, there was plenty to be thankful for. He clicked his pen again and added, "I am grateful for my skill as a woodworker and for every piece I've sold. I am grateful for my loving wife and healthy son. I am grateful for the roof leaks and all because it still shelters us. I am grateful for the village, which is supportive and friendly." Reading back these lines, he felt a subtle shift in his chest, as if a small burden had lifted. The problems were still there, but a spark of positivity dimly glowed in his heart. He closed the notebook gently, looking at Lan. "I guess we'll see what happens." The next morning, Min woke up earlier than usual, strangely energized. He performed his routine tasks, washing his face, eating a quick breakfast of rice and fish with Lan, then set off for the workshop with a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't that his problems had magically disappeared overnight. Instead, he felt a tiny flicker of faith that perhaps solutions existed if he could just remain open to them. He walked along the dirt path, passing the neighbors' houses, each stirring to life. The river glistened under the first rays of sunlight. He caught himself actually smiling at the simple beauty around him, which he often ignored in his hurry to start working. That alone felt like a positive sign. In his workshop, he cleared a small corner of his desk and placed the notebook there, open to the page he had written. He ran his fingertips over the words, inhaled deeply, and whispered a quiet thanks for the day ahead. Then he got to work. Mid-morning, just as he was wiping sweat from his brow, a local teacher named Mrs. Huang appeared at his door. She was known for her kind heart and for tutoring children who were behind in school. Min had repaired her classroom benches once, months ago. "Good day, Min," she greeted. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. Please, come in," he replied, offering her the only chair not covered in sawdust. She smiled, producing a small piece of paper from her handbag. "I was wondering if you could build some new bookshelves for the school. We've received a donation of books, and we desperately need proper shelves." A spark lit in Min's eyes. A new order was always welcome. "Of course I can. Let's discuss what you need." They spent the next half hour discussing dimensions, styles, and costs. Mrs. Huang seemed genuinely pleased with his ideas. By the time they settled on a price, Min realized it was fair and would help cover at least one of his overdue bills. He showed her some sketches, carefully explaining how he would reinforce the shelves to hold the weight of many books. "You're always so thorough," she remarked with a grin. "That's why I came to you first." As she left, she handed Min a small deposit enough to buy the necessary wood without dipping into his own savings. Min watched her walk away, feeling a thrill in his chest. It was a coincidence, perhaps, but he couldn't help recalling Dai's words. When you consistently cultivate a mindset of abundance, you start making decisions and taking actions that align with abundance. The day continued with minor, yet uplifting surprises. A neighbor dropped by with fresh vegetables as thanks for a small furniture repair Min had done. Another villager requested a quote for a dining table. Even though not all these interactions were guaranteed sales, they added to the sense of possibility that had been missing from Min's life. That evening, Min updated his notebook. New project for the school: bookshelves. A wonderful opportunity to earn and also help students. Grateful for neighbors who value my work. He also wrote more about his goals, allowing himself to dream slightly bigger. I will have enough orders to expand my workshop. Imagining an expanded workshop with better tools and perhaps an assistant to lighten his workload felt almost daring. Lan, noticing his brighter demeanor, asked how his day went. For the first time in a long while, Min was able to list good news without immediately pivoting to worry. Maybe that old man was onto something, he said quietly, half amused by his own words. Sometimes faith can open doors we never knew existed, Lan replied. Let's keep believing. Before bed, Min reflected on the subtle changes. He realized that even if the law of attraction was nothing more than a fancy way of saying be optimistic and take proactive steps, it was improving his mindset. And that alone had value. He wasn't ignoring his problems, he was simply choosing not to let them consume him. In the back of his mind, a small voice wondered if Dai would ever return. There were still so many questions, so much to learn. But for now, Min felt a new sense of confidence and calm. He drifted off to sleep imagining not the worst, but the best, a future where his workshop thrived, his family prospered, and perhaps he could even afford to help others in the village. The journey had just begun, and already life felt different. The seed of belief had been planted. All that remained was to water it daily with hope, gratitude, and an openness to new possibilities. In the weeks that followed, Min threw himself into his new projects with a focused determination tempered by a hopeful heart. True to his word, he began each morning by reviewing the notebook. He'd read his list of goals, adding new items whenever they popped into his mind, and then spend a few moments in silent gratitude. His carpentry business saw slow but steady growth. The order for the school shelves progressed smoothly, and word of mouth about Min's quality workmanship continued to spread. Occasionally, a passing traveler would poke a head into the workshop to inquire about small souvenirs. These minor transactions didn't always amount to much, but each new customer felt like a sign that the tide was turning. Lan noticed that Min's entire demeanor brightened. He still had the same responsibilities, the same concerns, but he approached them differently. Instead of catastrophizing every potential problem, he focused on actionable solutions. When the landlord stopped by to collect rent, Min calmly negotiated an extension to cover the previous month's shortfall. He explained he was working on new orders, which the landlord could plainly see. There was mutual respect in their conversation, a sense that better days lay ahead. Despite the positive momentum, life was never without challenges. One rainy afternoon, a loud crash erupted in the workshop. Rushing inside, Min discovered that a makeshift shelf he used for storing planks had collapsed, scattering boards everywhere and cracking the freshly varnished lid of a custom table he had just finished. "No!" he exclaimed, heart sinking as he picked up the damaged piece. A deep gouge ran along the once flawless surface. It would take hours, if not days, to fix. Time he had little of if he wanted to meet his delivery deadline. The client was expecting the table by the weekend, and he didn't want to lose the goodwill or risk a late fee. Panic surged in Min's chest. For a moment, old negative patterns threatened to overwhelm him. Why does this always happen? Or I can't catch a break. But he remembered Dai's words. He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and told himself, I will find a solution. He calmed the frantic beating of his heart and began a careful assessment of the damage. Seeing that a portion of the table's lid was split beyond simple repair, he realized he could either replace the lid entirely or attempt an inlaid design that might disguise the crack. The latter option was riskier and more time-consuming, but it would also transform an accident into a potential piece of artistry. After some thought, Min decided on the inlay. It aligned with the spirit of turning challenges into opportunities. So he set to work, meticulously carving out the damaged section, preparing a piece of contrasting wood with a subtle pattern. The new inlay design would be delicate, requiring a steady hand and unwavering patience. With each careful chisel and sanding, Min felt a strange sense of purpose. By the time he finished, the table was more stunning than it had been before the accident. The inlaid piece gave it a distinctive, almost luxurious character. The client, when they came to see it, was delighted. "How beautiful!" they exclaimed, running their fingers over the smooth, polished inlay. "This is beyond what I expected." Min grinned with relief. He recalled how easily he could have wallowed in frustration instead of seeking a creative fix. Another small but meaningful lesson seemed to surface. adversity sometimes paves the way for innovation. However, not all setbacks were so neatly resolved. On a different occasion, a supplier delayed delivering the specific type of hardwood Min needed for the school shelves, leaving him scrambling to meet the deadline. Some nights he worked late, the glow of his workshop lantern burning long after everyone else had gone to sleep. Though exhaustion tugged at his body, he maintained his new approach, focusing on what he could control, visualizing a successful outcome, and staying grateful for the work he had. One morning, as he was finishing the final assembly of the shelves, Mrs. Huang appeared to check on his progress. She was visibly worried, wringing her hands and pacing around the workshop. "What's wrong?" Min asked gently. She explained that the school's main benefactor had suddenly withdrawn some of the promised funds. The shelves were still needed, but the payment might be delayed. The school board was scrambling to find alternative sources of funding. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears welling up. "We didn't mean to do this to you." Min felt a twinge of concern. He needed that income. But he also saw Mrs. Huang's distress and remembered the children who would benefit from the bookshelves. Carefully setting down his tools, he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It'll be all right. I'll finish the shelves," he said with a calm conviction he didn't entirely feel. "We'll figure out the payment later. The kids need these shelves." Mrs. Huang's face lit with relief and gratitude. Min felt a weight in his chest, but also a sense of resolve. He was choosing to trust that this act of generosity would somehow circle back in a positive way. If we only do good when it's guaranteed to profit us, then what kind of world are we creating? He thought. That afternoon, he loaded the finished shelves onto a borrowed cart and delivered them to the school. The children gathered around, pointing and cheering at the brand new structures where their books would finally have a proper home. Some had never owned a book of their own, and they stared wide-eyed at the colorful covers waiting to be placed on the shelves. Their excitement was contagious, and despite the uncertain payment, Min left feeling richer in ways that money couldn't measure. When he returned home, Lan noticed his tired but contented smile. He explained what had happened, and she squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "Doing the right thing, even if it's scary, will always lead to more good." In the days that followed, Min felt a pinch financially, but he didn't regret his decision. He continued writing in his notebook, reminding himself that kindness and belief in abundance were part of the law he was striving to follow. A week later, just as he was beginning to worry about the shortfall, an unexpected visitor arrived at the workshop. It was an official from a neighboring town, who had heard about Min's craftsmanship through none other than Mrs. Huang's cousin. The official was looking for a carpenter to build new desks and benches for a larger school. The job would be considerable, far bigger and more lucrative than anything Min had ever taken on. As Min and the official discussed designs and costs, he felt an elation that nearly made him giddy. This single contract could stabilize his finances for months. He would be able to pay off outstanding bills, repair the leaky roof at home, and even upgrade some of his old tools. Over tea, the official produced a deposit check that was more than generous. When the man left, Min stood alone, staring at the check in his hand. Is this the law of attraction at work? He wondered. Or is it just coincidence? Part of him wanted to dissect it logically. His quality of work impressed people, who then spread the word, resulting in more business. Yet he also couldn't ignore how his own attitude, generosity, and belief seemed to be speeding the process along. His willingness to do the school shelves, even without guaranteed pay, had directly led to this new opportunity. He glanced at his dusty notebook, the pages filled with goals and gratitude. A humble, grateful smile formed on his lips. Perhaps the reason behind these events mattered less than the fact that they were happening. By choosing optimism, generosity, and faith, he was opening doors he hadn't even known existed. That night, as he shared the news with Lan, they celebrated with a simple but joyful meal. Even Tien sensed the excitement, clapping his hands when Min showed him the deposit check, though the child was too young to grasp the significance of money. There was a lightness in their small home, an energy that hinted at better times to come. Min fell asleep reflecting on the lessons he was learning. While challenges still arose, each one seemed to shape him, pushing him to grow rather than shrinking his spirit. Maybe that's what all this is about, he thought. Not just attracting what you want, but becoming the kind of person who can handle it with grace.